Hello, everybody. Before we start with the program, we would like to do a land acknowledgement. Chabot College respectfully acknowledges the original peoples of the lands on which this campus is built. For thousands of years and hundreds of generations, the Tochenio people actively stewarded these lands to ensure they provided for all living things. This land on which Chabot was established was and continues to be of significance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. Today, we acknowledge the impact colonization had on the Chochenyo Muwekma Nation and recognize our responsibility to help them heal from this history and secure a sustainable future. Thank you. I would also like to share a bit of history from the Chicano Latino Education Association, also known as CLEA. Since its founding in January of 1988, CLEA's purpose is to advocate and support opportunities for Chicano Latino students, faculty, and staff at Chabot and Las Positas College, and to serve as a vehicle for alumni and friends of the community to continue a lifelong participation in its educational and cultural programs. Some of the events and activities hosted by CLEA include the Chicanx Latinx graduation celebration, fundraising for Chabot student scholarships, La Bienvenida, and among more. This is the third year we're celebrating Chatting with Chingonas, one of the ways CLEA contributes to our campus celebrations of Women's History Month. We are grateful for our President's Office partnering with us to bring you today's speaker, who will be introduced a little later this afternoon. Before that, though, I would like to pass the stage to our President, Dr. Susan Sperling, to welcome everyone today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the beautiful reading of the land acknowledgement, Ms. Gutierrez. Very appropriate start. It really is a great pleasure to welcome you to the second of our Spring President's Speakers series, which we are proud to co-host with the Chicano Latino Education Association, CLEA, in honor of Women's History Month. As part of Chabot's institutional commitment to addressing systemic racism, inequity, and disenfranchisement, and to support social justice, we're really proud to host Dr. Susana Munoz today. And with those few words said, I'd like to now turn to Director Gabriel Chaparro, who will tell us some more as he introduces us to who Dr. Munoz is. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I started talking and I'm like, I bet you I'm on mute. And sure enough. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to be here, to have you with us. And I'm excited that Dr. Munoz has made some time to be with us today. I'm going to share with you a bit about her. Dr. Susana Munoz is Associate Professor of Higher Education, Program Coordinator of the Higher Education Leadership Program, and Co-Director of CSU Initiatives for the Race and Intersectional Studies for Educational Equity Center in the School of Education at Colorado State University. Her scholarly interests center on the experiences of minoritized populations in higher education. Specifically, she focuses her research on issues of equity, identity, and campus climate for undocumented Latinx students, while employing perspectives such as legal violence, racist nativism, Chicana feminist epistemology to identify and dismantle power, oppression, and inequities as experienced by these populations. She utilizes multiple research methods as mechanisms to examine these matters with the ultimate goal of informing immigration policy and higher education practices. Dr. Munoz has been honored by the White House Initiative for Educational Excellence for Hispanics for her teaching and research. She was also recognized as a Salzburg Global Fellow and named one of the top 25 most influential women in higher education by Diverse Issues in Higher Education magazine. She also brings 13 years of student affairs experience in multicultural affairs, Greek life, diversity, and leadership training, TRIO programs, and residence life. aside from that, on a personal note, Dr. Munoz has been instrumental in helping me through my educational and academic trajectory. I've always appreciated her insight, her wisdom, and I am excited that you all are going to get to see a bit of what I've had been privileged to experience over the past couple of years. So with that, pass it to you, Dr. Munoz.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with all of you today. Again, my name is Susana Munoz. My pronouns are she, her, hers, ella. I am coming to you from Fort Collins, Colorado, which sits on the stolen lands of the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne people. I just kind of wanted to share a little bit about my journey and a little bit about the work that I've done with some amazing activists, immigration activists across the nation today. I'm going to share my screen and get us started. I'll already see this. Okay, we're gonna go here. There we go. So my journey begins in Mérida, Yucatán, Mexico. I came to the United States when I was 6 years old. My mother came to the United States on a fiance visa. And so she married my stepfather shortly after arriving in the United States. She was also escaping domestic abuse violence from her previous marriage. And so, so it was sort of a bittersweet sort of like leaving a country that she's always known, but making a new life for her family. I got to the United States, and the visas are only for 3 months. So it was a different time and era when I arrived, and it was during the Reagan administration when amnesty was happening. And so compared to the students that I work with and for today, my immigration story is so different. It took 4 years to get our citizenship, and it was such a privileged process due to the fact that I had a stepfather who knew the language and knew how to navigate the immigration system. And so this is a photo of me and my abuela, Mama Adi, and my tios and tias. And so when we talk about journey stories, we talk about the things that we left behind. And so it wasn't quite clear to me coming to the United States what that would mean. It was also interesting to also have what I say, I have two feet in two countries, but sometimes I feel like I'm not part of either one. And so Gloria Sandua calls this sort of when we think about borderland theory. So, and so this is in this green dress that I, according to my mom, never took off for a whole month. And that was my first day of school. My child gives me this look as well. So, and I try to take pictures of her. And this is my last day my last day is my doctoral graduation. And I had my Mama Adi there. And it was a special occasion with my parents. But my grandmother didn't understand the word what was happening. All she kept saying is, "Me siento importante." I feel important. So it was definitely a very, very special moment. So I'll talk a little bit more about my journey later in the presentation as well. So the way that I'm going to structure the presentation is that I am going to talk about some of my research that I've been conducting with and for undocumented students, particularly activists, and giving you sort of a landscape of what that looks like now, but also the lessons that I've gained from these activists and working alongside them. And so you'll be hearing we'll bring in some of their voices into the space, and then we'll using, because I teach theory to my graduate students, community cultural wealth theory is a theory that I really enjoy in how I also structure my own story. And we'll leave some room for Q&A. So to begin with, I just want to give you a snapshot of, what immigration looks like. Right now, we have about 40 million immigrants living in the US. About 11.7% are undocumented, and Mexicans, individuals from Mexico account for more than half of those individuals. Children account for about 1.8 million of the folks that have resided in the United States, and they've been here the majority of their lives. And so nearly about 100,000 undocumented high school students graduate each year. That number has shifted from a popular number we used to use in the last 10 years, which was 64,000. And so I also want to point out that deportation enforcement under President Obama was at a record high of 2 million people. So there was a big difference that happened with both the administration and with Obama and the Trump administration. Obama's administration did more of an audit in terms of more targeting more businesses. And so the Trump administration kind of didn't necessarily have any structure in terms of deportations. So who are undocumented students? 2/3 share the Latinx background, and this is intersectional. So not just Latinx folks or not just undocumented folks are Latinx. Most of them were brought to the United States involuntarily. Most grew up and received all of their education here in the United States. Many are first generation low income. In fact, that is how I got interested in looking at working with undocumented students, is working in TRIO programs. Those programs are first generation and for individuals that are low income, but you have to qualify for Pell. So undocumented students don't qualify for any financial aid. So it got me to think, where do students get their support, their academic support? And many are unaware of their status until they apply for a driver's license, apply for scholarships, or have to travel for sports. And typically many attend community colleges. And that's sort of where my research is at right now, at working and looking at the community college pathways. So just to give you a little bit of a historical timeline, the Flyer versus Doe case was litigated at the K through 12 level. And so that case determined that undocumented children would receive free public education at the K through 12 level. The first time it was litigated in higher education was the Leticia 8 case in the California state system and the UC system. And so it did rule that at first that they were able to get in-state tuition. And then later it was overturned. And so since then, it was a sort of a 10-year process in which we looked at these DREAM Act. So the difference between sort of what we call in-state tuition residency policy or in-state tuition policies and the DREAM Act was a pathway to citizenship, whereas in-state tuition, and sometimes they're called state DREAM Acts, which I feel like that's sort of like misunderstood. It only provides sort of a residency tuition in many cases. And so the Obama administration was able to pass the DACA policy. And so that allowed students to work. So that gave students an eligibility to work, not citizenship, so just work. So they're able to have a work permit that can be renewed. And so when the Trump administration came, they rescinded that. And then the Supreme Court blocked that decision by the Trump administration. But now where DACA is in the Texas district courts. So it said that it was unlawful. DACA was unlawful according to the APA Act. And so renewals can continue, but new DACA applications have halted. So in the research that I've been conducting, there's been a lot of it's been interesting, the shift, because the majority of the students that I spoke with like 5 years ago had DACA. And now the majority that I'm speaking to now that are entering college qualify for DACA, but have an undocumented status. And so this map kind of gives you like a snapshot of how we're kind of all over the place with our in-state tuition policies. Of course, AB 540 in California, I think that's the policy that you operate under as well. And so there's states that that do provide state funding as well. And so when I arrived to Wisconsin, in my first faculty position, they rescinded their in-state tuition policy without a vote when the governor came in, because it was a budget line item. And so all of these states, like Michigan, for instance, the in-state policy that in that state is a regent policy that it sits at the University of Michigan. So there's a lot of variety on how policies are passed to get in-state tuition. And there's also restrictionist states like Georgia. Georgia has restrictions of admission for their selective institutions. Alabama and South Carolina have restrictions for their community college system. So depending on where you were born, in which their context plays a really big role on how undocumented students and DACA students navigate college access. So this is from a book that I wrote about 5 years ago. And so let me tell you a little bit about the story of this book. So, and when I did my dissertation study in working with Mexicana undocumented students, I understood them as being really afraid of sharing their status. And so that was one of the things that kept coming up, is about just kind of disclosing and sharing their status. And then when I went to Wisconsin and attended a rally in Chicago, that was the first time I attended a coming out rally, they called it, and where students or individuals self-declared themselves as undocumented, unafraid, and unapologetic. And I wanted to really understand, how did they get to that level? How did they get that level where they were able to state that in a public place, they had with such conviction, with such passion, and sort of relay their story? Because that was definitely not the experience that I had with students that I worked with with my dissertation. So the question that really guided this is, how do you undocumented activists make meaning of their legal status? And so the frameworks that I used was their understanding this process of legal consciousness. And so legal consciousness is developed based on individual experiences and how they make meaning and of a sense of their self is really constructed and shaped and influenced by the laws, how people are treated, by behaviors. And so that's sort of how they develop this legal consciousness. Another framework that really guided this work was cultural citizenship. This is sort of cultivating space for minoritized folks to have a sense of belonging, the freedom of expression, or a membership or a group that they can belong to that have very similar motivations and values. So one of the things that kept coming through is sort of understanding legality through migration and family experiences. And one of the participants mentioned that, I remember re-meeting my mom when I was 3 years old. And so a lot of their understanding of legality came to sort of the reunification of with their families. And so many times one family member will go first and then others will follow. Alex recalled his teen years with difficult experiences with his mom, who is a survivor of domestic violence, and talked about, I remember my mom, couldn't call the cops on my dad, and she was afraid that they were going to get deported. And so she never followed up on any asylum or any of that, which didn't work out to our advantage. And so the way that legal understanding of their legality was through some of the resources that they couldn't access because of that fear of being sent back to their country. And Yahida explains too, of a very popular sentiment that are told by parents, was that she explained that I was always told that because that information I wasn't supposed to share, anything could happen because somebody can come for them, or her parents and take me away. So disclosure was very much hidden, something that you don't share with others. The other component of this is negotiating the context and disclosure. And so Jessica from Arizona talked about the passage of Proposition 300, which prohibits students from who are undocumented from qualifying for in-state tuition. And so again, depending on where you're born, depending on where you got your schooling. And so her being in Arizona is one of the more controversial states, during her sophomore year in high school that got passed by voters. And it started to understand what it meant, because I was in a conversation with my peers and we started to ask, what does this mean for us? And who can we talk about this information? And so, and I will kind of also say that even though like California has an in-state tuition policy, there is sort of that element of fear in all locations. And so just because there is an in-state tuition policy, we have one here in Colorado, doesn't necessarily equate to sort of equity towards undocumented people, right? And so there's still sort of systemic violence around immigrant populations. And so when this policy passed, it was about sort of what does this mean for livelihood? How do I access college? And the other component of this was this critical enactment of cultural citizenship. And so Angelica from North Carolina stated that, and critical enactment of cultural citizenship means that you, as a group, you get to understand and make meaning of your legal status, but you do it in a way through your activism. And so students were able to really drop that shame because they found out more information, and they were able to build solidarity groups with other people. And many of these students participated in direct action. So they were, protesting and, were detained, and then they were able to get out. And so I think some of them were able to see like, okay, I did that and I'm here. This, I can still fight, and so I think the activism was what really propelled and heightened sort of their sense of dignity. And so Angelica stated that I'm undocumented, and I just somehow also internalized and realized that that doesn't make me less of a human being. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And Hayin from New Mexico understood the anti-immigration rhetoric as well, and used the story to silence sort of these master narratives in which how immigrants are constructed in the media and in news stories. And he said, one of the things that he encourages me to tell students is I'm also undocumented is because of how the media portrays immigrants. The media has this negative picture of us and portrays this negative stereotype about undocumented immigrants. And so I think the activism and the information that they're getting not only created sort of this pride around being an immigrant, but also they were collecting information about the system that they were also able to pass down to family members as well. So, and then disrupting and reclaiming colonized spaces. I think this is also trying to address sort of like that structural and systemic inequities that are built in our immigration system, and sometimes are intended to break and damage and demonize bodies and make them unhealthy. I think I have seen this way more apparent because of the pandemic, and the fact that I think many undocumented immigrants weren't able to qualify for some of the aid as well. So, and so Yahida listened to her body, and she reevaluated the approach of her activism work. And this is probably goes to folks that do any kind of equity work, is that as activists, this is not a sprint. How do I prepare my body for the long haul without damaging myself? And so I have to say that, you know, being in these spaces with these activists and learning alongside them and being in community with them has really, you know, informed the kind of professor that I am, informed the kind of scholar activist that I am in terms of my research. And I think all of these individuals really challenged me because, you know, they don't have a lot of trust in the universities. And so a lot of them were, you know, checking in terms of what are you doing with our information that's going to make a change, right? What is it that you're doing that is going to, you know, we know your professors are publishing and things like that, but that doesn't, it's not accessible to our communities. And so it really informed the kind of scholar that I am in terms of making sure that I'm a public intellectual, making sure that the research that I do doesn't stay within these journals that only my peers read, but how do I make my research really accessible to my community, the people that I work with, and to others that need to listen to it. So I think the big takeaways from this is that the progress towards liberation requires both agency, space, and solidarity groups. And so social activism acts as a counter space for developing that, what I call critical legal consciousness, that criticality and of the system in order to reach sort of this authenticity and liberation. And that peer networks are super important to understanding and unpacking legality. And it's also important for educators to perceive undocumented people as assets and resources. One of the things that so activism looked different for me when I was an undergrad. And I think for me, activism was, yes, like protesting, but I never like understood activism. And this is something I talk to my colleagues about, is when students can, you know, express themselves, even just kind of writing a letter critiquing how we operate in the university, how they're feeling unseen. I always kind of frame it as an act of love. Activism, you know, folks don't put themselves out there. Folks don't engage in that critique unless there's some love there that's rooted, you know, for these communities and for our students. And so, you know, we have activism on our campuses, and so I always have to, you know, explain to some of our administrators that this is how they're showing love. And so we just have to approach it with a level of curiosity and compassion, right? And so, so these were the important lessons that I think I take away from the students that I worked with. I know that was a lot. And so I don't know if our folks have questions before I begin with sort of the community cultural wealth.
There was a question, Dr. Munoz. The question is, how do we better center the narratives or experiences of undocumented students at a community college, especially?
Yeah. No, I think that's the work that I've been conducting with folks, is how do we, using sort of this framework on docu-friendly campus climates, you know, within the community colleges, what I've been finding is that there seems to be sort of the designation or that labor falls on one office or one person. And so in talking with, and from the student perspective, I think they're getting a lot of support from different kinds of people, including their faculty, but it's only like the go-to faculty that sort of like feels safe. And so how do you create a culture or institutional climate that incorporates sort of this undocu-friendly campus climate And that takes work in terms of how you onboard people on your college campus. And it also it has to sort of be a public statement from our leaders too about this is where we stand, and this is how we're supporting undocumented students. I don't find that there's one perfect solution. It just really depends on your own context and the assets that you have within your community college. But the folks that I've been working with now, I think what's going to be interesting, a lot of students that I've talked to say they feel much safer with online learning than they did in the classroom. And I think that's going to be a big shift for many in terms of like, they appreciate sort of like not having to feel that the stares or field questions, waiting for class to begin in a physical space. And so it's going to be really interesting. I feel, how do we prepare for that? Yeah.
Thank you. As a follow-up question, I remember growing up, my dad saying like, no seas metiche, don't get involved with stuff, and discouraging activism. Because we did have a lot to hide, right? Or at least that's what my parents thought. And so how do you build or support students in creating an identity, an activist identity?
Yeah, I mean, that was exactly the message that I got my family. And, that's the other part, because they were just like, you're not there for activism, you're there to learn, but I think the thing is that it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? There is a lot of lessons in learning and organizing and just how to build coalitions with one another. There's such a tremendous amount of learning that happens with that. And so I think the trick is that how do we bring that, how do we take it from the classroom to the streets, or how do we make the streets the classroom, right? And teach about some of the very intricate and sophisticated ways in which you message, to build coalitions, you provide support for one another. No movement is perfect. No movement is perfect. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned is that you really have to understand and try to work with different personalities and leaders, but also like we have to also critique ourselves as activists, right? When are we taking too much space? Who are we allowing to talk, right? Who's in the shadows in terms of the folks that are doing most of the labor, but not necessarily out there with the message. So I think that's one of the ways that I think we rethink about what we talk about the lessons of activism and learning is, I know there's so much education there that I think our students can kind of try to understand where they fall into place. And I think it's a fluid thing, right? And so it doesn't mean like you have to get yourself arrested to be called an activist. Activism looks really different. It looks different in many ways. And so it doesn't have to be, direct action. It could, be, look like in different ways. And I think that understanding of how do they utilize their voice, how do they utilize their education to really better not only themselves, but their community and try to uplift others that are coming behind them.
Thank you.
Yeah. So is it okay if I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay, good. So, okay, what did I do here? So the community cultural wealth model comes from Tara Yoso. And so essentially, she says that we like really focusing on Latinx folks, looking at that we all bring these assets, right? That we all have these lived experiences. And she talks about familial capital. She talks about social capital. She talks about navigational, resistant, linguistic, aspirational, and that's our cultural capital. So we are all assets. And so I get really, there's a lot of deficit-minded language sometimes that we use for immigrant populations, minoritized populations, is that we need to fix the student, that the student's missing something. But it's in actuality, it's our structures, it's our systems that are not working for many of our students. And so this is one way that we change our language from being deficit orientated to asset orientated. And that's one of the things, even in working in TRIO programs, you know, we use this language like at risk, right? At-risk students are supposed to be first-gen students, low-income students, minoritized students. And I cringe because I feel like those are students at potential. We just need to construct the structures and environment and culture within our institutions to make sure that they realize that potential and that others are making sure that they're tapping into that potential as well. So in terms of my own cultural wealth, so my familia capital really stems from, you know, my mom and my mamari. And so we, you know, this is a picture of us in Yucatan. So I think I gain a lot of validation from seeing my mom just sort of persist in life, but also she's a fighter. And so sometimes when I'm in meetings and I'm about to be angry, I always say to myself, y'all don't know who my mom is. Y'all don't know who my abuelita is, because I'm really rooted in that passion for, you know, equity, for making sure that everyone is getting an opportunity. And so coming to the United States, my mom always kind of, because of her first marriage and the experience that she had that in her first marriage, it was really drilled out to me, is get your education. Do not depend on a man, and get your education. That was a consistent message throughout my lifetime. And so there were times where I'm the oldest of 4. And so there was times where there was that pressure. I'm thinking of Encanto right now, sort of that pressure of being sort of like the person that creates the pathway for my siblings. So I had to be sort of like the first person to go to the college, first person to get an internship, first person to, you know, do all the things. And so that was really entrenched in how I grew up. And then my Mama Adi, she lost her husband when she was 24 and was left with 6 kids. And so I think about the fact that she didn't have an education formally, but she knew medicine. She knew how to, like the remedies. And so there would be a lot of neighborhood folks that would come to her for their ailments. And so I think that really modeled for me sort of like, one, that home education is just important as that schooling that you get, but the education doesn't also define you, right? You can, you know, make yourself, you know, believe in yourself and do things that really are fulfilling and joyful. So this is me and my hamaca. This is how we do our pláticas. We lost Mamari during COVID, and so it's been really healing that I get to talk to her about her today. So thank you for that. So the aspirational capital is really sort of those validating agents who share their own life experiences and give you advice and community role models. And so again, this is I think my abuela was really like this, our spine of our family. So like how we're like really foundationed by her. These are my two babies as well. And I think as a mom, I also get aspirational capital from being a role model for them. And so even though they don't give me this, I mean, I'm inspired by my children too, but I feel like I have to also be that role model for them. And so the other two people that I consider sort of role models for myself is my major professor was Dr. Larry Ebbers. And I never in my wildest dreams would be like, I love this man, because he, you know, not all of our role models look like us sometimes, right? And so I think the fact that he believed in me more than I believed in myself at times, and the fact that, you know, when I couldn't pay my university bill, like money would show up, right? And he would just find a way. He would just make sure that I was, you know, taken care of, and really provided me a really good, you know, just a really good support system when I was in graduate school. And so that is him putting me got to see myself on the big jumbotron. Just keep in mind, Gabe, when you graduate, you'll see yourself on the big jumbotron. So yeah, let's shoot for that. And then lastly, Dr. Laura Rendon. She was the first Chicana faculty that I had. She was the department chair at Iowa State when I was in the tail end of my program. And I took her class called College Persistence. And it was with her friend Amaury Nora, but it was all about minoritized students. Never in my my graduate program did I get a class just based on me. And I didn't know we could do that. And so I think she really informed me the way I teach, you know, that you can be yourself, that you can be authentic, that you can bring in yourself into like the learning. And so she continues to be sort of my rock. And she's always telling me to slow down. She's always telling me that I'm for some reason, she has that effect where when you see her and you start talking, like it's the tears, she has that healing vibe. But, you know, individuals like her who have paved the way for me. And she always told me about her University of Michigan days when they were attacking affirmative action during that time, and talked about the coalition of other Latinx folks that were at Michigan with her. And so those stories stay with me because they're important to understand that there are folks that also are fighting like we're fighting today, but they're still here, right? So that's that was very important. So she's still very much part of my life. Linguistic capital is the fact that I'm able to, and again, navigate both of these worlds, being from Merida, Yucatan, and having the ability to go travel there. And so I have all of my family there. My mom doesn't have any family here. So we make a point to make sure that we do some visits to Yucatan. And so that's one of the skills that I feel are essential, is that I can navigate both of these, you know, worlds. Even though my cousins say I'm really agringada, right? They make fun of my Spanish, but I feel like they give me so much, you know, courage. To give me a lot of validation around sort of like my language, and in ways that I use it to tell the story of my research in a different language, so I can access more community. So this is a picture of like not even half of my cousins. This is who could make it that night, which was like maybe 5. It was a weekday too, so people had to work. So this is in Merida. I know we have good genes, so I think that's our gift, our asset too. But I always love to tell people this is a vending machine in Yucatan. So this is all like I wish I had a vending machine in my building like this, because this is all of the favorites. And then this is my favorite dish. Is nobody knows it, what it is most of the time, but it's called puchero. And puchero is a Yucatan dish. It is my comfort food. It is a 3-meat stew. And there's a lot of vegetables. It's like a whole day process, but there's a lot of vegetables that are in there. But my favorite is the salpicón stuff that goes on the top, which is like lime and radish and cilantro. And so it's the best caldito ever. So, and then social capital. So these are folks that I've been with me the whole time, since I've started graduate school, or even before that, when I was a student affairs professional. These are my sister scholars and individuals that I consider my chosen family. And so these are individuals that I think at times in the academy, like there's very few places that you can be vulnerable with others. There's a lot of imposter syndrome that comes up in how I navigate the academy. And so these are folks that lift me up. I got married in October and our wedding pictures were pricey. So I'm going to use the heck out of my wedding pictures as much as I can. So these are pictures of my sister scholars who are Judy Kiama Marquez, who's at University of Arizona. She's a provost. Dr. Michelle Espino, who's a professor at University of Maryland, and Dr. Liliana Garces, who's a professor at University of Texas at Austin. And so, and then I also have my other sister scholars, Zena Colasso, who's at Arizona, Amanda Taccini, who's at Arizona State, Leslie Gonzalez, who's at Michigan State, and Heather Schotten, who's at University of Oklahoma. And so we have been in touch with each other. Well, the sister scholars, the three of us, we have these three mujeres, we have been together since our doctoral program. And this is, we've uplifted each other. There's times we wanted to quit and they were in different separate programs, but we supported each other, we acknowledged each other, we validated each other. So these are sisters, these are family, as you see, that I've developed throughout the academy. This is probably the best gift that I've received from being a professor, is this group of women who are such hard pillars in my life, but also we all get into good trouble. And so that's always very fun for me. And then navigational capital is when we talk about sort of navigating distinct worlds and with our country, our families, our college, and we develop strategies. With each new context brings in sort of a new language. So in Mexico, we don't sleep in beds, we sleep in hamacas. One is because it's so hot and beds are very hot. And so I love the fact that we have a hammock room, right? And I go back and there's this hammock room, and it's such a reminder of sort of how I have to navigate, sort of like both of these countries that I'm part of. And if you haven't slept in a hammock like all night for your first time, there's some strategies around that. So we had a fall from a friend that had a hammock, slept in a hammock for the first time on one evening. But I think going to Iowa State was a culture shock. So I came to the United States, from Merida, Yucatan. We moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, right? And from Cincinnati, Ohio, my parents are very bohemian, kind of very artsy and very, very, very outdoorsy people. And so from Ohio, we moved to Fairbanks, Alaska. So I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska, like the majority of my life. That's where I graduated high school. I would say that was a pretty positive upbringing because the Alaskan culture was very much centered in our curriculum. And so it wasn't necessarily like mirrored my culture. I would love the fact that we were learning about Alaska Native language, Alaska Native history, and that was infused in all of our curriculum. So the culture shock was moving to Iowa. That was definitely something that I was not ready for in terms of the lack of culture, but particularly at Iowa State University, which is a predominantly white institution, it was really difficult for me to make community at the beginning. And I remember telling my parents, it's like, there are no Latinos. I can tell you, I'm the only one. I've tried to find other Latinos. There's none. But I ended up joining a Latina sorority. And that was one of the first that was founded at the University of Iowa, but was at Iowa State. And that was something that I felt was very instrumental in my not only identity development, but also in how I was able to navigate a predominantly white institution. It really made it smaller for me. And then just as a professor, I've gotten the privilege to really, go to different institutions and visit different places. And one of the places I was able to do a talk at was Harvard. And I never have experienced imposter syndrome as much as when I stepped into the campus of Harvard University. And I think a lot of it was stemming from the fact, like, how am I even here? Like, I'm not smart enough to be here. Why are they inviting me? And so I think having to navigate sort of these different contexts in ways that really brings in our ancestors. And I think part of why I had a phone call to my mom is that you were meant to be there, you belong there. And I think that was sort of the capital in terms of when we talk about all these kinds of capitals kind of coming together, is that it did take family, it did take sister scholars, it did take all of those things for me to get over that imposter syndrome and having to present at a very prestigious institution and doing it really well. But yeah, I think that's the other component of being a faculty member, is that these spaces are not meant for our individuals with my background. And I think a lot of times there's that questioning of, do I really belong? So, but I think it's all this capital that I've gained throughout my years that has always been sort of a resounding yes. If not, I'm going to make sure I construct it so we do feel like we belong. And then the resistance capital really stems from, what Terry also sort of explains, how students experience microaggressions, culture shock in college. And so through those experiences, they develop and acquire sort of this resistance. And so my resistance is through my writing, the calling out of white supremacy and white ideology, and how that's detrimental to our educational system. My students, I was telling, they are my retention plan because my resistance is I develop curriculum in this graduate school process so they don't come out broken and they come out whole. So we've constructed a doctoral program that is really centered on liberation and compassion and dignity, and really proud of the way that we've resisted sort of this dominant notion of what graduate school needs to be, and been able to graduate lots of Latinx folks and students of color, and that has been the way I have resisted in this role. So this is my class, one of my summer classes, and two of they're now doctoras that I was able to hood. And this is my new book that came out last year, that I co-edited with Lindsay Perez-Huber, around just sort of how the Trump administration and the impacts of what we call the Trump effect impacted our educational system. So this is a quote that I always end with, and I truly believe when you walk with purpose, you collide with destiny. And I think the fact this is not a coincidence that I'm here, it's not a mistake or accident that I'm here. I think I've had lots of different kinds of capital, lots of different kinds of community capital, lots of different kinds of people that have really uplifted me. And this is a mural that I love that's at Yale College. And it's on their Casa Latina. And it really, you know, depicts sort of the folks that we uplift, the folks that are uplifting us, and the folks that we're trying to pull up in the process. So I thank you for inviting me to share my story with you. And muchas gracias.
Everyone, please help me give a big round of applause in Zoom to Dr. Munoz. Thank you. Dr. Munoz, we are starting Women's History Month, and as a true chingona, and for those of you who don't know what chingona means, I'm sharing a definition from one of my friends. A mujer who is intelligent, fearless, and can get things done, also known as boss or badass. So you embody everything that a chingona is, and I want to appreciate you sharing your story today. We have a couple questions. I think we have some time for questions. So if you have more questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll start with one of the first questions that we got. So there have been students who state that they do not feel undocumented and unafraid, especially after the political climate under the Trump administration or in certain situations. What is something you would say to these students, especially those who thought that they would eventually be able to apply for DACA, but cannot at this time?
Yeah, there is not one way to be, you know, undocumented, unafraid, unapologetic is not necessarily the goal for everyone. And so understanding that that's a process, and it's okay to be where you're at. You know, and I'm hoping that I mean, we heard it in the State of the Union about a pathway to citizenship for undocumented individuals in this country. I mean, I've heard it for a long time, right? And so I think is really just continuing to, you know, be really hopeful. And you know, I talk a lot to you know, our legislative people, our representatives, and our, you know, our president about sort of like, you know, we need to be doing more. What is it that we could be doing? You know, is there a way that we can, you know, within our in-state tuition bill, we have to do something about workability. If you graduated from a high school in the state, and if you have a bachelor's or associate's degree from our state, you should be eligible to work in our state, right? And so what can we do that's the concern that I have right now. And so I think as activists, as advocates, as educators, as leaders in our community is to really start talking for individuals on finding solutions. The students don't, we're part of that process. And so they alone, yes, can also advocate for change, but I think it's also our responsibility to provide sort of some humane mechanisms for our students as well to be able to reach their full potential and to be gainfully employed.
Thank you. You mentioned that, you know, not all of your role models look like you. And I think through your pictures, we could see that a lot of the folks that you rely on, that you depend on, that support you, do look like you. But how do you seek mentorship? And how do you become a mentor? I think for a lot of Latinx folks, because we're first gen, we don't think we have the ability or even like that folks want us to be their mentors. So how do you do both? How do you seek mentorship and how do you give mentorship?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky question, because I think you know, it's okay to have multiple mentors for different things, right? And so for Larry Ebers, a lot of times it is strategizing around budget stuff that I'm dealing with, and how do I frame things, or, he's such a pro at that. And he's still upset that I didn't become a community college president. He tells me every time. But I think a lot of it is just about that organic, relationship that happens. And so conferences, and for me, I have gotten some emails of, from people that I don't know, students that are working with and for undocumented students, or folks that are undocumented or have DACA, that just say, hey, I need some advice about this. And then for me, it opens the door for like, okay, how would you like to continue this conversation or relationship? What would you need? What does that look like for you? And a lot of times it's like, I'm just going to call you when I need you. Is that okay? It's like, yeah, absolutely. And then, and so I think for me, that's a no-brainer. Like there's no way that I will say no to a student who is looking for mentorship. And I think it's part of my responsibility. And I also recognize that's a lot of labor that is unseen within the academy. And so how do I also make sure that I'm also communicating that labor to my director or my dean about like, okay, I did all this stuff and you see my CV, but this other stuff, because I'm the only Latina who is in the College of, or, we have a couple of Latinas in the School of Education, but, I'm also mentoring other Latinas, or I'm also mentoring other groups. I just need you to know that my labor doesn't just stay within my school, right? It's across the nation. It's important to communicate that too, because there's a lot of labor injustice about that particular issue, but those that are working towards equity, that doesn't necessarily make it into their job description. But I think just seeking out mentors that resonate with you. And sometimes I have mentors that I've had. One mentor who I protested outside her office when I was an undergrad, who told me that you should be in student affairs. And I was like, no, thank you. I don't want people protesting outside my office. But then I later went and helped me with she helped me with my applications. So I've known her, she's known me since I was like 18. And so she's now a retired student affairs professional, but we're more friends than anything. We talk, and I think so our relationship has evolved over the years. I think, so I think that's sort of like an indicator that our mentors serve as in different ways and different points of our lives, but they also evolve into other people in your life, right?
Thank you. I know you've shared a lot of nuggets today. Can you share some advice for new student affairs professionals and first-gen researchers?
Oh, that's like, it could be a whole workshop right there. I think this is what I tell graduate students about research in particular, is situate yourself in your lived experiences. So understand that you want to unpack or examine something, but make sure that it's rooted in who you are and not what the academy wants you to be, or not what higher education is looking for in terms of employability. Like sit yourself in a place where it speaks to your soul, your mind, and all of that is online. And I say that because writing a dissertation is hard, and it's hard. And what is going to get you up in the morning and to coffee shops on your laptop is to situate yourself in something that really fulfills your passion, fulfills your spirit and your soul. It's not going to be fun all the time, but it's something that's connected to your lived experiences. In terms of a student affairs professional, I've had some tremendous supervisors, and I've had some not so great supervisors. And one of the things that I've learned is that there's lessons in both of those, right? And so, so understanding that you have a career path, like I started off like I want to be a VP of student affairs, and then after, doctorate, college president. And so it's okay to shift your path depending on sort of your lived experiences and where your energy is taking you. And it's okay to be comfortable in your own skin. So in the picture that I have, and it's an older picture, but it's the only picture that I've had my school take in terms of my professional picture. I had straight hair. And so during quarantine, people were making banana bread and all kinds of workout things. And I was going to my curly hair journey. When I was a young professional, I was told that my hair looked unprofessional curly. And so it was really about unlearning and unlearning all those things that I picked up along the way about what I was supposed to be. And so it's been a 2-year journey with these curly hair. These curls are doing okay. But so those are the things that I think sometimes we need to take time about, like, why do I do the things I do? Where did I get this from? And is it really me? Does it speak to who I am? So I think it's just to truly be you and authentic you is so the way that you can navigate the student affairs process. And to be a young student affairs professional, those were fun days. They were.
I love the curls. I want to open it up to the audience and see if there are any other questions. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute and ask. And okay, so Professor Pearson has a question. Please, Professor Pearson, unmute.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the great talk. Yeah, I've maybe a little bit of a specific question. So I teach psychology, and there's lots and lots of students who are interested in graduate school, and they often talk about the cost, how expensive it is. And so really what I wanted to ask you, if I can, is especially talking to students of color that maybe would have an opportunity to get a scholarship at a place like Iowa State, or Iowa State's got one of the best counseling psychology programs in the country where every student gets funded. But oftentimes those students don't want to go to Iowa, and they kind of tell me that. And I'll own it a little bit as like a white, professor, like I feel a little bit of tension there. Like I want to say, there's opportunities, might even be in some ways a better idea to apply all over the country rather than only to Berkeley up the street or something. But what sort of language would you suggest that faculty in my position use to talk to students of color about maybe going somewhere that's a predominantly white campus and be encouraging? I hope that made sense.
It does, and it's hard because I think when I was in graduate school at Iowa State, we had folks that were from like California and Miami, and it was difficult. It was hard. And I think part of what I tell students is a couple of things. One is that graduate school is temporary, right? And so it's not like you're going to, it's a temporal time. And I would encourage them to really reach out to like other minoritized students at like either Iowa State or other, predominantly white institutions, to really get the real deal about what it is like to live like in Ames, Iowa, where you can't find a barber. You can't find people to do your hair in Ames, Iowa. You have to go to Des Moines. And so for some people, that's like a non-negotiable. And so thinking of, talking to students are like, what is sort of like the ultimate non-negotiables for you? But talk to folks that are already there and how they're navigating it. Even though it was hard, right? There was community. And I think community was what sustained us in the program, in that doctoral process, is that we weren't alone. We had folks that looked like us in our cohorts, but yeah, and there's a lot of places that look like Iowa State too. So it's to me, having that experience, I've only been at predominantly white institutions, so it's a kind of like it's not a very big culture shock coming to Colorado State. It's always a culture shock for me to go to Wyoming, but not Colorado. So I think it's about framing it in sort of a way that, okay, what are the non-negotiables, but also what are some maybe things that you're going to be gaining and learning along the way in this program, and that it's only temporary. Graduate school is temporary.
Thank you. Thanks.
Maria, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, so I find myself that as I'm getting ready to write this dissertation, the work that I'm doing and writing about and reading about is very close to who I am, and it affects me personally. So is there any strategies that helped you? And like, I know self-care and scheduling time off, but like actually getting the work done and that writing done, because the best dissertation is a finished dissertation. What would be your strategies that you use during that time with the topics that you're talking about?
Yeah, I had that very same kind of issue when I wrote my first book. So I actually called the publisher and said, you know what, I don't know if I can do this, because it was really hard to write around pain and write around trauma. And it was also triggering some of my own stuff, right? And so, and this came from my publisher, it's like, this is something that all first authors go through. I suggest that you also get a therapist as you write this. And I thought that was kind of odd to get that from your publisher. But then what I learned was that a lot of my resistance of writing was rooted in some of the scary things that I didn't want to unpack, in my own life as I was reading this. And so know that that's an option, right? Is to be able to maybe tap into some resources around mental health wellness, and to really ask around, why am I resisting this? Where's that resistance coming from? That was really helpful for me to kind of identify, like, okay, this is what's happening, and this is sort of like the ways that I can name it, and also try to push it out of my way. Meditation helped a lot for me as well. So meditation I was able to really silence my head and those voices that kept telling me, like, this is not going to be perfect, everyone's going to hate it, blah, blah, blah. So meditation was really helpful in that aspect as well. And your people, I am not a person that writes in isolation, even though we're kind of in isolation with COVID. But so I have to write in community with others. And so when I did that and was able to say, all right, I'm working on chapter 2, here's what I want to get done in this, even in this virtual space. And you have that accountability. That was really useful, and boy, if I didn't show up, I would be like my phone would be blowing up about, where are you, blah, 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 you said you were going to show up. So it's part accountability and part like, okay, this is a community that I can even say, hey, I'm struggling, to say something, help.
Thank you so much, Dr. Munoz. So I'm going to close us out. And as we're closing, I'm going to ask a favor from all the folks that are here. I am going to ask you to put one word that has come out of this conversation with Dr. Munoz I'll start out with a couple myself, but if you can please put it in the chat. Inspired. I've been inspired by the conversation today. I've been encouraged. I feel like I've been informed. I see empowered, resistance, motivated. Keep on coming, y'all. Otherwise, I'm never doing this again. Enlightened. Thank you. I just want to appreciate you, and I want to reflective. Thank you. I want to thank you for sharing space with us today. Progress. Thank you. I feel seen, powerful. Thank you. Inspired and comforted. Thank you. Worth and gratitude. Beautiful. Thank you. Uplifted. So as we close today, thank you so much for bringing all these emotions to us. Appreciate all your wealth of knowledge today and sharing your story. I hope that we get to cross paths again and bring you back soon in person this time. We can bring you from Colorado to Los Angeles, to Hayward. I love and thankful. Thank you all. Thank you so much, Dr. Munoz.
Yes, appreciate you all. Thank you so much for the space and invite and for the community today. I appreciate y'all.
Thank you all for joining us. Where's the music, Gabe? Where's Beyonce?
I don't know if you can handle another round. So
I can't. I can't. Oh, thank you all. Dr. Munoz, amazing. Thank you so much for your story today, and for just breaking it down, undocumented students, and inspiring us through that conversation as well. I don't know if folks want to say anything else.